right, good afternoon. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee, January 27th. We have two briefings this afternoon, and good news, colleagues, we are taking a little break from energy. We are going to start with the state of the Bay. Our first panel is Allison Colden from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and Dave Namazi, Chief of Staff for the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. As a reminder, our second briefing today is going to be sort of an update with the Maryland Department of Environment. We have to take a reload break between briefings. Also, the Vice Chair and I have the Rules Committee starting at 3 p.m. So at that time, Delegate Stein will be presiding over the committee. But with that, let us start on our annual State of the Bay. Please take it away, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. It is great to be here with you today to talk about the view ahead, State of the Bay, according to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. My name is Allison Colden. I'm the Maryland Executive Director with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and I am joined today online by my colleague Matt Stegman, our Maryland staff attorney. Happy to share with you the current status of Chesapeake Bay restoration, some of our recent triumphs, our remaining challenges, and how we can ensure the Chesapeake Bay is healthy and thriving for the future. Before we dive into what's to come, I thought it would be prudent to take a moment to reflect on some of our biggest wins over the past few years. Some of you may know that 2025 was an important year and deadline for the Chesapeake Bay as it marked the end of the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. While not all of our goals and outcomes of that agreement were met by the 2025 deadline, there were some significant wins and progress to highlight. First, Maryland has made some significant progress in reducing nutrient pollution reaching the Chesapeake Bay through its watershed implementation plans. And this graph here that shows the reduction in nitrogen over time, you can see our progress has not been linear and there is still a long way to go, but the continued downward trend is great news for the Bay, along with significant wins with phosphorus and sediment as well. Restoring critical habitats has been another highlight. Along with federal and nonprofit partners, Maryland has opened more than 2,500 stream miles to migrating fish like eels, river herring, and American shad. Landmark projects like the removal of Bloody Dam on the Patapsco River are showing success even just a few years after implementation, with spawning fish like these river herring detected in areas where they would not have been found just a few years before. Another area where Maryland has really shined and outpaced expectation is land preservation. The Maryland the Beautiful Act established the goal to protect 30% of the land of the state by 2030, a goal which was reached in 2024, many years ahead of that deadline, and now is focused on protecting 40% of the state's lands by 2040. Of significant note is that of those lands currently protected, nearly 1 million of those acres are agricultural lands, which help support the vitality of Maryland's agriculture industry, protect sensitive habitats, and keep farmers farming. Lastly, a personal favorite of mine is the celebration you can see here of the completion of oyster restoration in Maryland's 5 large-scale restoration tributaries, marking the largest oyster restoration project in the world. Not the US, in the world. In the time since Maryland kicked off large-scale restoration, the adult oyster population has tripled. Harvests in the public oyster fishery have neared levels that they have not seen since the late 1980s. And harvest values are approaching nearly $20 million annually. This is important not only because it's the largest project, but it's also a model of how restoration can help bring species back from the brink and of how investing in the Bay brings real dividends for Marylanders. Although 2025 was the Bay Agreement deadline, it is not the finish line for Bay restoration, which is why just last month in Baltimore, under the leadership of Governor Moore and with the support of many of the people you'll hear from on your next panel, the Chesapeake Bay Executive Council came together to approve a new revised Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. This new agreement reaffirms the Bay program's partnership to bringing the Bay back to health, and refocuses agreement outcomes towards 4 overarching goals: thriving habitat, fisheries, and wildlife, healthy landscapes, clean water, and engaged communities, reflecting the need to work throughout the watershed to achieve the outcomes we want to see. What does this mean for Maryland? For Maryland, it means focusing on non-point source pollution running off of farms, roads, and cities, which remain the largest contributors to nutrient pollution reaching the Chesapeake Bay. Agriculture's contributions are primarily based in the fact that it remains the largest land use in Maryland, but is trending downward thanks to the efforts of farmers and agencies like MDA, which support the implementation of conservation practices on agricultural lands. Where we need the most work and the most help is stormwater. So this is the only sector that is trending in the wrong direction. And that's because climate change is making this worse and making efforts harder. Efforts to slow down and reduce runoff have been implemented, but are currently being outpaced by climate change and continued development. There is some good news, and that is we know what to do. The policy solutions are in hand to address non-point source solution, including, but not limited to, addressing contaminants like PFAS at the source so they cannot enter our food systems, increasing the use of regenerative agriculture to improve healthy soils, improving nutrient management to bring real pollution reductions to bear, reforming stormwater permitting to reflect our current climate reality, and implementing holistic restoration through a whole watershed approach. As we look ahead to the next chapter of Bay restoration and implementing this new revised Bay Agreement, we know we have the targets we need, we know what to do, and we are backed up by 40 years of restoration practice and data. Now is not the time to pull back. Rather, it's the time to build on this momentum, and doing so will require support from all of the agencies you'll hear from today and the necessary resources to implement those programs and practices we so desperately need. The good news is that investing in the Bay is not just good for the environment, it's good for the economy, for public health, and for the state of Maryland. Specifically, we would encourage this committee to please work with your colleagues to ensure that the key agencies and programs you see listed here, as well as those agencies you'll hear from today, are supported in the FY27 budget, because none of the wins that I've discussed today, nor the future opportunities and challenges we've discussed, will be possible without it. Thank you so much.
Can you also make sure to pull a mic close to you?
Sure. Thank you. Can you find my presentation? Yeah, thanks. Full screen? Yeah.
Yep, that's cool.
Control. Oh. Thanks. Hello, I'm Dave Namazi with the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. I don't know if it's on the screen.
Not yet, but it will be.
She broke it, not me.
I said I wasn't going to touch anything.
It's right there. Sharing, maybe the screen's not sharing.
There it is.
Just everything is so slow. There we are.
Thank you. And maybe, there we are. Thank you. I'm Dave Namazi with the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. Thank you, Chair Corman and Madam Vice Chair Gaetan. I really appreciate being here to provide a briefing on the Chesapeake Bay. I wanted to start off with a Chesapeake Bay Health Report Card that's in front of you. This is something we've been releasing for over 20 years. We've been really doing this for a few different reasons. Primarily, one, to actually look at the Bay in real time using the most recent data available, and two, use it as a summation of what we would expect or what we're seeing in water quality. Too much, while models are really important, they're simply models. And looking at the data and understanding the data is what this is really focused on. And just to make sure that we are reaching as broad of an audience as possible, in the last year, we also produced a report card in Spanish to help our Spanish-speaking residents in the state. So basically what you see here is the Chesapeake Bay. While the Bay declined slightly from the previous year, it's maintaining a positive trajectory, a statistically significant improvement in the Bay over the last 20 years. And while we've been releasing this over 20 years, we actually have, we've gone back to all of the data going back into the mid-1980s and calculated scores back then. The watershed itself is doing slightly better. And the Chesapeake Bay watershed, we're getting data from all these different partners and all the smallest rivers throughout the watershed to do this. And we're using a variety of factors, including not only water quality and typical kind of scientific water quality data, but also looking at the economics and the society needs as well in those regions, and to try to begin making parallels between them. So very quickly, the Chesapeake Bay report card is, we're continuing to see improvements in the Bay. I know personally, in my 35 years in the Bay, I could see the improvements, and I've been really happily impressed by them. The watershed scores have been good, but we need more on economy and society scores to improve moving forward. We're continually adding new indicators and working with stakeholders to produce this. The big thing is that we need the data, and we need the data consistently. And one of the big areas that we're really going to be looking at in particular is human health indicators, and how do we put those in as well. Some of the early work that we've done has shown that where we have some of the worst water quality, we also have some of the most significant human health challenges as well. But we'd like to tie that together better. Another aspect of this, and we're working with partners such as the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, is to look at fish indicators and incorporating fish indicators into this report card moving forward. I really want to focus a little bit today on research that the Maryland State Legislature asked UMCES to provide related to oyster research in a bill which was 1228 in the House and SB 830. And it really looked at various broad-scale oyster spat, shell, and substrate, and seeing what could be used to enhance oysters the most moving forward. That report was just finalized in December and submitted. And the really key aspects of this was that we used both lab experiments, field experiments throughout the Bay, plus symposiums where we brought in international and national experts to learn what they were doing and what they were working on. So we got this very broad spectrum of not only our own field and lab research, but also hearing from other experts and working through that process. And the big takeaways from this is that alternative substrates for oysters are effective in the lab and field, and have been used in other states for decades. Maryland certainly has had a preference for shell. Oysters have a preference for shell, but other things work as well, and we have to look at that. Because at the end of the day, fresh oyster shell is really in short supply, and alternatives are needed. We looked at how reefs could be built, and stones can certainly help build reefs. We've shown that. We also are really looking at ways that we can change that ribbon between the land and the water, where there's a lot of riprap and other things that are protecting the soils there. How can we turn those into places where oysters live? And so we're looking at a whole bunch of experimental techniques to enhance that. It is being done elsewhere. We're looking at something in particular called oyster castles, but you could also start growing oysters on riprap themselves. They might need a boost, a starter, but then once you get them going, hopefully they'll be able to stay and build reefs. That really depends upon where you are in the bay and how well you continue to get larvae from natural sources to keep those bars going. Finally, we were also asked to really look at whether we were putting out our oyster spat at the right time. Were we doing it too quickly, or should we be holding them for a longer period of time? The reality is the longer you hold them, the more impacts you may have of predation, but also the less you can grow in a season. And it turns out that the way we've been doing it has been pretty efficient, which is holding oyster spat for about 5 days. I want to just touch on, I don't have a slide on this, just touch on a couple things related to challenges going forward in the Bay. And my colleague Allison touched on a couple of those such as contaminants, but we're really also looking to tie together what is really taking place in our most important living resources. What's taking place with our striped bass, with our blue crabs, with the impacts of things like blue catfish. These are all really significant but very difficult questions to answer. And part of the difficulty is the type of data you might want to look at. A lot of people like to look at fisheries data, which is how many fish are caught, versus fishery independent data, which is data that is not based on the fishery itself. And both are very important. And how do you understand the dynamics of both of those moving forward? So with the Bay Program partners, we're really looking at taking this up as really to try to understand what factors are going to be impacting that moving forward. Finally, and in my last slide, I just want to touch on the fact that UMCs, I'm sure, as well as the agencies sitting behind me, have all really felt the impacts of changes at the federal level, and these changes have been very rapid. We've lost significant funding from NOAA, EPA, NSF, Fish and Wildlife, and others. The oyster hatchery itself at Horn Point, you may have heard, is under some very significant financial strain due to presumed cuts from NOAA, and where they've kind of said, this year we'll only get a 50% cut, next year it might be 100%. They haven't been very clear. A lot of money has now been passed. We're not sure if it's coming through. The communication on this has been challenging. I want to say this has been a wobbled relationship. Hopefully we'll get it straight. The Bay Program itself, great partners. Traditionally, since the very beginning, they've wobbled on some of their commitments, which has been very surprising to us and many of our other partners. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you both for the granular rigor you bring to this work. We will start with Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dave and Allison. Thanks for your reports and your extensive research. And Dave, in particular, I want to thank you for UMC's report on oyster substrate. It's very helpful. And for both of you, just want to ask about impacts on the Bay of the increasingly unusual weather patterns that we're having, especially last year's extreme heat, as well as intense rainfalls. Could you just comment on how that impacts the quality of the Bay?
Sure. So certainly when you get big rainfalls, you often get what's on the land into the water, right? So the bigger the pulse of that rainfall, sometimes you really see the short-term aspects of the pollution associated with it. The good news, when we've looked at things that correct for how much pollution is in that water, it's less than it used to be. So that's a good sign that changes on the land are starting to really take effect, and we're seeing that in the water. Extreme events are often very, offer different challenges, sometimes on the short term, depending on the season and when it occurs. Big events in the winter are better than big events in the spring, which can then set up challenges in the summertime. So, in most general terms, that's where I'd like to leave it. One other thing, though, and this was reported in the Sun yesterday, a few of our scientists were in it, was about, salting roads and the challenges associated with salting roads on big storms like we've had, and how these pulses end up in streams and can really change the health of the stream based on the amount of salt that ends up in a stream, which are typically, fresh water with salts in them versus this pulse of salt. And some of the work our folks have done have shown that over the last 8 decades, there's been, a multi-fold, a 4-fold plus increase in some of these streams and their conductivity, which is a measure of salt, in the streams that we've seen. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Just to briefly add a couple of notes on the living resource side of things, you can imagine that extreme heat and drought conditions directly impact the critters living in the Chesapeake Bay, one of whom, which is extremely important to our local economy, being striped bass, and the environmental conditions in the winter are extremely important to the success of that population, which we have seen in the juvenile index has been struggling mightily over the past 5 to 6 years. Also, with respect to the agriculture industry, having extended droughts followed by these large rain dump events makes it very difficult for farmers to plan, provides additional risk to those farmers, and kind of undermines the resilience of that industry overall. And so just to sum up, across all sectors and across all aspects of the Chesapeake Bay, the changing climate conditions, weather patterns are having some significant impacts that we are seeing today and expect to continue to see into the future.
Thank you.
Delegate Jacobs.
Right now, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions for Allison. I'm looking at the bar chart. It's talking about nitrogen reaching the Chesapeake Bay and under wastewater 5.45. We're having some significant overflows, leaks going on Blue Plains right now as we sit here and speak, and the one in Baltimore County as well. It's a habitual leaker. Is that number representative of these habitual leakers, or you know, certainly with these millions, multi-millions of gallons going into the bay, it's got to have a huge impact, and it just seems like that number may be lower than it should be. Or is that just the nitrogen only? Is that low in the wastewater?
Yeah, thanks.
The discharge?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Delegate. So on the bar chart that you're referencing, you're seeing the overall reductions by sector, and that's over the long term from, I believe, 2010 to 2023. And what that reflects is there have been significant investments from the Bay Restoration Fund in particular in upgrading our wastewater treatment plants and getting them to reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus in that effluent before it's released into the Chesapeake Bay. And so the majority of progress made in Maryland's nitrogen reduction has been due to the upgrades of these major and minor wastewater treatment plants and the investments of the Bay Restoration Fund. But to directly to your question, I would point you to the other slide that I showed near the beginning that shows the nitrogen declining over time. And you'll see in 2021 and 2022, there is an asterisk there and a higher line than what is anticipated because it is capturing those significant overflows and those major failures, frankly, that we saw at the two plants in Baltimore are captured in that particular graph you see there. So overall, wastewater is still the largest source of our reductions based on those investments. But yes, every time we have one of these overflow events, it's undermining that progress.
It just seems like when you got 50 or 60 million gallons a day and they close a fishery all the way down to 301 Bridge right currently in the Potomac, that impact looks much bigger than the bar chart as I see it. And the other thing is, I just want to talk briefly about, you talked about the straight bass in the wintertime. Obviously, this new proposed baseline realignment, which really takes the protection in theory off this brood stock, which is, and centers it more on the summer resident fish, which is a complete opposite of the theory they've had for the last 5 years. So I'm wondering, because Atlantic States Marine Fishery says there'll come a time when all the elements come together and you have a huge hatch. But when you take the focus off the brood stock, the ones that are carrying the eggs, wouldn't you agree that that's detrimental to the long well-being of the stock?
So in order, the striped bass is a very complicated issue, so I will offer to meet with anyone who has additional questions following the briefing. But directly to your question, Delegate, we need an all-of-the-above approach. And so ASMFC, Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and the state of Maryland have taken efforts to protect the large spawning fish, which is why we now have a slot limit of 19 to 24 inches and no longer have that large trophy fishery, which used to be a big pull to Maryland in early May, catching and harvesting these large trophy-sized fish. But the other thing, which kind of goes back to Delegate Stein's question about impacts of climate change, is we know that the summer temperatures in the Chesapeake Bay are extremely challenging to striped bass, which are really suited for cooler water temperatures. And so the proposal that DNR is currently scoping with the public and is open for comment is really related to trying to also protect striped bass in the summertime when we know the catch and release mortality, meaning after those fish are caught, released, and which of them survive and which of them don't, is much, much higher because of that heat stress in the summertime. And so closing a larger period in the summertime is intended to try and protect that portion of the striped bass population, as well as the actions that have already been taken to protect those large spawning fish.
Well, this winter, I don't know exactly what you see on Facebook, but there's been no shortage of people standing there like it's a 15-point buck they just shot. They're holding up these 30 and 40-pound striped bass, and sometimes 3 at a time. There's no way that you're catching 3 fish at the same time, getting them in the boat at the same time for a 1-minute period without getting them back in the water. So there's definitely harm. And these are not slot-sized fish. These are huge fish that are carrying potentially 10 million eggs. And it's very concerning to the fishery and those that have been adversely affected by some of these decisions that don't agree with these decisions. The type of pounding that this brood stock is taking, the additional 34 days being proposed to catch these huge fish that are just trying to get to their pre-spawn area and up to bay to actually spawn. So wouldn't you agree that there should be more science in these decisions before they make these radical changes to shut down a fishery in the middle of the summer vacation season for 31 days? And at the same time, they're catching these huge fish that are definitely the bearers of the future because they're carrying up to 10 million eggs per fish. And there's a mortality there. You can't say that there's not in the winter, this winter fishery that's definitely going to have a detrimental effect. Wouldn't you agree with that?
It's non-zero for sure. Compared to the summertime, the science shows that it's a lot less. And I would always agree with you, Delegate, on the need for better data and better science. So we're definitely aligned there. And with respect to taking action, I think it's been clear with the juvenile indices as low as they have been over the past 5 to 6 years that there is something impacting this population and its ability to successfully spawn in the Chesapeake Bay. And so if it comes down to delaying action that could further help improve the population or taking action that could help conserve the population in the long term, I think that's where we should be headed.
Well, I don't want to go further with my questioning because I could go another hour, but I would like to talk with you a little bit more about what science is not being done.
Happy to.
When the actual eggs are laid between there and the first juvenile index survey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. To tell us more about 15-point bucks, Delegate Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of bucks killed along the Potomac River. Nice big bucks. But anyhow, my question would go back to the watershed report card. My district is the C&O Canal that parallels the Potomac River is approximately 184 miles long. So my district covers mile 99 to 139 miles of the Potomac River, plus maybe even further than the 139 mile marker. So my question is how do you come up with a D- for all of the Potomac River, as I see here on the slide? Is it possible that up my way could be a C or a C+ versus?
Absolutely. So, this is where we're taking kind of these big geographic areas, trying to assess where natural lines should be drawn associated with that, and then capturing all the data that we have. And so we always want to be as fine of a scale as you could do with it being reasonable and with the amount of data that you have. So it's more of a matter of how many monitoring sites are within these different areas and how robust is the data associated with that. And that becomes part of the challenge in some of these grand summarizations. I mean, nothing is better than having monitoring sites, you know, very, very close to each other, so you know what's going on right there. Certainly agree with you on that.
So it's very possible that the water up my way could be
May well be.
much
Yep.
higher grade.
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
thank you.
And I think the watershed report card does break up the Potomac in different areas, so you may,
Okay.
we could talk more about that at another
Okay,
time.
thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So back to the bar chart showing the nitrogen reaching the Chesapeake Bay by sector. It makes me very unhappy to see the share that agriculture has in that, which doesn't mean it isn't true. But, and yes, this year was very challenging in terms of managing it with, you know, very dry conditions at planting time and then torrential rains in the latter part of July. What, can you say a little bit more about what is working, what isn't working? Some more thoughts about that share? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Delegate. And as I mentioned previously, a lot of the reason why it's so large is because it is such a large land use in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And so that's part of it. The other is, you know, what we learned from the CESAR report, Comprehensive Evaluation of System Response, which now is a couple years old, but was the retrospective from the Bay program of what is working well and what needs improvement as we move into the next phase of Bay restoration. And one of the things that was really highlighted in the agricultural sector is the pace of implementation of conservation practices on agricultural lands is not keeping up with what we would want to see or need to see to try and really see this sector trending down. Although I do want to reiterate that agriculture is trending down. And so we are making improvements, but it still continues to be the largest implementation or the largest contribution in terms of sector to the overall loads. So we need to continue to focus on the pace and scale of implementing these conservation practices, implementing them in a targeted way that is considered in a broader watershed context so that we can make sure we are building those practices one on top of another and amplifying each one's effect. And then also looking at where those pollution hotspots are and really trying to address where agriculture is the primary contributor to that pollution and focusing efforts in those areas to rebuild healthy soils, which helps make it into a sponge, helps retain carbon, all of the good things that we want to happen, really making sure that we are prioritizing those practices on agricultural lands where pollution is coming from.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, it's great to see the panel, as always. I've got a question. So in my district, I have several landfills. Two of them are sited right on the Gunpowder River. They're legacy landfills. They've been there for a long time. Department of Natural Resources, in my opinion, has taken the right step to put one on a pathway to closure here, the Days Cove landfill. Baltimore County, though, is taking a very different approach. The Eastern Sanitary Landfill, they've actually requested to expand the size of that landfill here recently, pretty dramatically, actually, adding a couple 100 feet to the overall height of it. So my question is, what are your thoughts about siting landfills on rivers? Is that generally a good thing, number one? And number two, what can we do with these legacy landfills to clean them up? You know, eventually this one it's going to close. How can we make it so that it is not a continual source of pollution for that body of water? Because I would bet like a lot of what's going on in the Gunpowder and the Upper Bay there is because of these landfills. Not exclusively, but they're playing a big role here. So I just would like your thoughts on that.
Sure, I'm happy to take that, Delegate. Thank you for the question. Just like any other industrial land use, landfills and other industrial land use right along the water is going to be a challenge, whether it's due to primarily, in this case, the stormwater and the runoff that's coming directly from that site, or if it's from other direct discharges from those locations. In terms of citing them and the legacy siting of some of these landfills, like many other industrial facilities and issues that we see in Maryland, a lot of the siting has caused environmental justice issues, and the culmination of multiple industrial or other polluting facilities in one place is something that we can and need to address moving forward, because it has an impact on those communities directly, as well as the quality of the Chesapeake Bay. And so in terms of what we talked about with respect to stormwater and industrial permitting, and I would also defer some of this to the agencies as they come up on their panels. But just like any other industrial facility, we have to make sure that the permitting is in place to properly monitor and enforce any runoff that's coming off of those facilities and understand what those impacts are, not just of that specific facility, but also the impacts as they roll up throughout that entire watershed when you have multiple facilities that are potentially inputting different pollutants into the bay.
Thank you.
Delegate Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about the bar chart. Through the years, I've never seen a chart that really reflected to landmass. And I think it would help this committee and help the public if they understood how many acres stormwater management was 9.39, and how many acres of agriculture was 21.05. I mean, if you take it on a per acre basis, this agriculture bar would be back pretty far. And I think every bar on here would be ahead of agriculture if you took in consideration landmass. And I understand that's not the whole answer, but I think it would help give people a perspective of what we're looking at. Because the landmass difference here between stormwater and wastewater and agriculture and natural is way off.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered that? Have you ever seen a chart that reflected that?
It's not coming to mind right now, but the Bay program does show, and the state agencies do show this information in a lot of different ways. So if it is out there, we will try and find it and send it your way.
Maybe I could just
Thank
add,
you, Mr. Chair.
if I could just add one quick thing, one quick point on that, Delegate, is that, when we're looking at best management practices toward reduction of nutrients, we're often looking at it on a per acre basis. And we are looking at it as a piece of land itself. So, that's really important in terms of scaling up, of whether this is going to work when you scale up or not. And I think, so that's just really important to consider. It's the amount of land you're looking at is always considered. It's just a matter of how you ultimately end up presenting it. Thank you.
So Allison, do you think maybe by this time next week you could send that to Kristen so she could circulate it to the entire committee? And if you don't have that data, do you think you can let her know that by this time next week?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. I do not see any further questions for this panel, so thank you both, and
Thank
thanks
you.
to Matt, who's online. We will now bring up the Chesapeake Bay Commission, the Maryland Department of the Environment, the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and the Maryland Department of Agriculture. Secretary Kurtz, congratulations on your new addition, and welcome back to work.
Sorry, I didn't want to reach out. You're good.
All right. Well, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share with you this afternoon
While we get this set up, I'm Anna Kilius. I'm the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. I am joined by our Maryland Director, Maggie Woodward, who's just behind me. And I will touch a little bit more on the Chesapeake Commission in my presentation. All right, so my purpose today is to kind of talk you through very quickly the next chapter in Chesapeake Bay restoration from a regional and a partnership perspective. Just on the Chesapeake Bay Commission, a reminder, we are a tri-state legislative commission established in the 1980s by the legislatures of Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. We have 7 members from each of those states. 5 of them are state legislators, 2 senators, 3 delegates, as well as a gubernatorial appointee and a citizen member. Here in Maryland, Delegate Sheila Ruth is our chair for the delegation this year, and Senator Mary Washington serves as our vice chair. Our other legislative members of the delegation are Senator Sarah Love, Delegate Nick Allen, and Julian Ivey. The commission's mission is threefold. We promote science-based policy in each of our states and at the federal level. We serve as a legislative voice in the Chesapeake Bay program as a signatory to the agreement, the only legislative signatory to the agreement, and we actively engage Congress on federal policy and budgetary matters, a distinction amongst many of the partners in this work. When I say Chesapeake Bay program, however, I am not speaking to EPA or CBC. I am speaking to the full partnership. So the entities here are the members of the Executive Council that leads that partnership. You have all of the Chesapeake Bay watershed states and the District of Columbia, the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and EPA on behalf of the full federal family of participants. The program is wider than that, though. It includes UMCs and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and all of the partners, the local governments, NGOs, universities that participate in this work. So when I say Chesapeake Bay program, I mean that much broader partnership. The key takeaways that I'd like you to note from my presentation today, just the bottom line up front, we have a refreshed Chesapeake Bay watershed agreement that is going to guide us for the next 15 years. It reignites that commitment that we have as a partnership to each other and to the Bay, and it commits us to finding innovative solutions and scaling up what we know works. The Chesapeake Bay Commission and Maryland continue to be major leaders in that effort, and it is largely because we stick to a few principles that have been core to our success. We are collaborative, we are bipartisan, and we are state-led in what we do. For the remainder of my presentation, I'm going to walk through very briefly the refreshed watershed agreement, the upcoming Bay program initiatives that we have over the next 6 to 18 months, and a few of the state and federal highlights of the Chesapeake Bay Commission from the last year. So first, the refreshed Chesapeake Bay agreement. The first thing to note about that agreement is that to help simplify our message, we've consolidated the agreement behind 4 core watershed goals. We've moved from 10 goals to 4, not to cut back, but to better recategorize our work in a way that is easier to communicate and to relate to for the public. These 4 categories are critical to delivering a healthy and vibrant bay and watershed to all of our communities. Within those 4 goals, you'll find 21 outcomes, each with specific targets that will be used to measure our progress and hold us accountable over the next 15 years. You'll find some very familiar outcomes under the Thriving Habitat, Fisheries, and Wildlife goal, including blue crabs, oysters, underwater grasses. Under the Clean Water goal, that continues to be the overlap between our responsibilities under the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load, which is the regulatory component of our work together, and the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, which is the voluntary component of our work. Under Healthy Landscapes, you'll see outcomes focused on forests and trees, land protection, and adaptation. And in engaged communities, that is where we focus on helping communities, including students and job seekers, connect to the watershed, enjoy its benefits, and make decisions that support its health together. One thing to note is this complement of outcomes is meant to think holistically about what a healthy bay includes, but it is not comprehensive. There are things that are not on this list that are very important to the bay and very important to communities within our watershed. Their absence is not because they're not important. It may be that a different partnership or entity is at work on those, and so we didn't need to duplicate effort within the Bay Program partnership. Four things to know about this watershed agreement. First, the timeline, the horizon on this agreement is 2040, so 15 years. We have a robust midpoint check-in in 2033 where we can assess our progress and amend our course. And 2033 is also the 50th anniversary of this partnership together. The 15-year timeline is meant to give us time to work from the latest science and modeling to plan on how to meet our objectives, to implement that plan, to see how it's doing, amend, change, adapt, and continue forward. One thing to know is every Bay jurisdiction has agreed to meet the next set of pollution targets by 2040. A few jurisdictions wanted to amp that up to 2035, but we work by consensus, and so it's very important that we have unanimity on 2040 for accountability purposes. Maryland being one of those jurisdictions that wanted to get things done by 2035. And there's nothing keeping us from trying to break the barrier. The outcomes and targets are driven by science. When we were drafting each outcome and target, we started with recommendations from our subject matter experts. We were clear-eyed about the progress we've made and the challenges we're facing and the threats ahead of us. We renewed our focus on why we support and protect and conserve these elements of a watershed. We asked, what is the ecosystem value that our communities benefit from, and how do we sustain that? And then we asked who benefits and how. And then finally, instead of separating actions related to climate change and other changing environmental conditions into a goal by themselves, kind of siloed, every single outcome, target, goal under this agreement will need to be considering the impacts of climate change and changing environmental conditions in their goals and in their planning. So that was a lot over the last year and a half for the Bay program, but we've got quite a bit ahead of us in the next 6 to 18 months. First, we are revising our structure and governance to make sure that we are set up in order to meet the goals of the agreement. Second, we are developing recommendations on how to incorporate tribal nations as partners in the Bay program. There are 7 federally recognized tribes, all within Virginia, that are seeking to join the Bay program as a signatory. And so the Bay program has taken on discussions on how to include these tribes into the partnership with the tribes. And third, we will be writing new management strategies for every single goal and including all the outcomes. And that is really where the rubber meets the road, the planning on how we're going to meet the targets, the actions, the funding, the partners. What is it going to take? And then finally, state and federal highlights for the Chesapeake Bay Commission over the last year, just so you can take a peek at what your colleagues in Pennsylvania and Virginia and our work in DC is doing. So in Pennsylvania, they appropriated $51 million to fund small wastewater projects across the state in 2025, on top of the $50 million in continuing funding that they're putting towards their Clean Streams Fund, which works to target improvements to delist impaired streams. They've also increased the operational budget for their Department of Environmental Protection. I'll skip Maryland for just a moment. In Virginia, they're continuing to invest record levels of funding in their agriculture cost share program, fully funding that program for the 3rd year in a row to the tune of $223 million last year. Our members also laid important groundwork for accelerating progress in wetlands restoration and for managing fisheries, understanding changing conditions. And in DC, we've been working to make sure that we preserve as much of the funding coming into this partnership as we possibly can. The minibus that included the Interior, EPA, and other programs was actually quite good news, and we'll be very vigilant on whether that money is moving down into the partnership. And I'll leave Maryland to the secretaries because I think they're going to give quite a few of the updates that I would have otherwise given. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, Secretary Josh Kurtz, the Department of Natural Resources here in Maryland. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, it's great to be in front of your committee. It's good to see you all. And I really want to start, I think Anna just made some important points about what other states are doing, but I would like to take a moment to just say we did it first. I think if you look at those programs, your committee and your colleagues have been putting these programs in place for decades, and it is being recognized by other states, and they are now doing it as a best practice. And I think that's critically important. We lead by example here in Maryland, and that is really a focus point for us in this the next iteration of bay restoration. So how are we organized internally to allow us to be successful? We do that through the Governor's Council on the Chesapeake and Coastal Bays watersheds. There's an important distinction here. We have the coastal bays in this now. It's not just the Chesapeake. We recognize that we've done a lot of learning and a lot of programmatic development in the coastal bays that we can directly apply to the Chesapeake to be successful in improving water quality. This is a very, very rigorous and large group. We have all three agencies represented. We also have planning, MDOT, MEA, MES, MDA, UMCs, our colleagues from the previous panel. So we have a very large group that meets regularly, quarterly, to ensure that we're making progress. And I think an important piece of the Bay Agreement, I like to think of that as the floor. That is the voluntary agreement that we have all agreed to do together to meet the goals. And then we come back together here in Maryland, we innovate, and we teach the rest of the watershed how to do it as well as we do it. I know Anna can't say that, so I want to take the liberty. So one of the ways that we're innovating, and thank you all for the passage of the Whole Watershed Act, I wanted to give you an update. In March 2025, our 5 watersheds, these are the first 5 selected of the Whole Watershed Act, were chosen. As you can see on the screen, they're geographically broad. They represent urban, suburban, and rural areas, predominantly agricultural areas. And there is one that is not in the Bay watershed. It is in the coastal bays, and it's really important for us to take what they're doing there in terms of land protection, implementation of ag best practices, and actually buffeting what's happening just across the border in Delaware to learn and expand that. Right now, when we think about the program, they're running right now. So last year, we really looked at the plans they were putting in place, and this year, they're really stepping into implementation, which is exciting. It will allow us to learn even more and be able to follow the science for what's being successful in terms of implementing the best management practices that we really want to see. One thing I'm so excited about was to see the number of applications that came in. Of the 5 projects that were selected, it has over 75 total partners. So that's local community groups, nonprofits, local government, university systems. These are very robust and dynamic. So when it comes to the funding, another thing I just wanted to point out, we are investing as a state of Maryland about a little over $11.5 million. That comes from the Department of Natural Resources, Maryland Department of the Environment, Department of Agriculture, and that is the seed. We have basically doubled that funds in terms of matching that with local county funding, grant funding, et cetera, to be able to really do some pretty impactful things. And I just wanted to highlight really quickly the work in Antietam Creek. They had some funding there through the county, through Washington County, to do kind of a basic storm control erosion project. What we were able to do is work with the county to really build that out, make that very robust, include way more resilience components, and be able to really significantly reduce local flooding as well as improve water quality, which is, I think, very important for us to ensure that the local communities are seeing the benefits of the work that we're doing all across the region. We have a departmental that I'm just going to show you the name of because we'll come back and talk about it later, but we've learned already from some of the work of the Whole Watershed Act, and we're now implementing that and really evolving some of our programs to catch up. So now I wanted to talk about the 3 of our really critical species. And striped bass, we've already started the discussion here, but I wanted to start with the striped bass juvenile age index. And what this graph is showing you is basically the number of young that are coming back into the system. And there are 2 circles on this graph. The first is when we had the crash of the population, 84 to 89, that resulted in a moratorium. The second is where we are right now. So the situation is dire when it comes to our juvenile species, or to our juvenile striped bass. And I wanted to thank Delegate Jacobs for coming. This year, we opened up our JI to members of the public, anybody who wanted to come and learn about how we do the juvenile age index. We affectionately call it the School of Rockfish, and we'll continue to do that if anybody would like to come out and learn how we're doing this, and why this data set is so important, not only for us, but for the entire coast. So why are the 2 circled periods different? I wanted to show you this next graph. So what you're seeing in that blue line above, well, I guess the blue shaded area up to the line above the bars. The bars are the juvenile age index. That blue line is where we are in terms of basically metric tons of female striped bass. So if you look to the left side, that was around when the moratorium happened. You could see that the population had crashed also from a biomass perspective. We're in a different situation now where the biomass is still rather significant and trending in the right direction, but our juvenile age index is not showing that we have the next set of generations. And I think, Delegate Jacobs made a really good point. We are seeing a lot of very large fish, and we're seeing a lot of people catching very large fish. a 15-point buck picture, they are dead, right? And we don't want that to be what happens to these striped bass, especially the females, as Delegate pointed out. We have a new communications plan around that to really make sure that we're sending out the best information. There is a new study out of Massachusetts about fish handling that we think will, if our anglers will follow, will allow us to curtail that issue of mortality from catching and displaying fish. So really, this graph is meant to show you that while we have tried over the past 5 years to really protect the spawning stock, we've not seen a difference in the young, but we have still seen that increase in the biomass. So what we're trying to do now is turn our attention to protecting those resident fish so we can continue to see that biomass increase if we're not going to see the JI rebound. We had a really bad storm. That's great for striped bass. I want to see more snow and more cold water. So I'm going to move now to oysters. As was touched on before, we completed the sanctuary restoration. I think a key difference in this agreement and the previous agreement is that the acreage of oyster restoration, we are committed to restoring 2,000 acres of oysters, 1,100 in Maryland, 900 in Virginia. Again, I'm not trying to say we're better, but so the thing that I think is exciting about that, though, is that's not just sanctuary areas. That's areas for harvest, for public harvest. That's aquaculture areas really growing out and making the industry even more robust. And our last species I wanted to touch on is blue crabs. As you can see here, we have where the blue crab, it sits within the threshold and the target. We're excited to kind of get to our next benchmark and learn more, get a better set of data in 2026. And then I will just end with a comment on blue catfish that relates to all three of these previous species that we discussed. Blue catfish is an absolute epidemic in the Bay. We've taken several steps to help curtail that, and a big thank you to my colleagues at the Department of Agriculture. But one of the ones I just wanted to let you know about was a pilot on electrofishing. It's a new gear type. We had 71 applicants, or 47 applicants to participate, 8 were chosen, and what we saw was success. I think 71% of our participants thought that commercial electrofishing was at least similarly, if not more effective than traditional harvest. So we're looking to add this tool to the toolbox to really be able to continue to increase the amount of blue catfish that we're taking out of the bay. And lastly, I just wanted to let you know, we are still working on our ongoing monitoring. We have our 124 long-term surface water quality monitoring stations that are managed to the Department of Natural Resources. We collect water quality data from a lot of different places, and we're still working to really align what we're seeing in the private, public sector, local government water quality collection. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague at the Department of the Environment.
Thank you so much. I'm getting hungry now, thanks to you. Anyway, good morning, Chair Corman and Vice Chair, members of this committee. I really do appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and update you on the Chesapeake Bay as it relates to all of the good work that we're doing at MDE. For the record, I am Serena McElwain, Secretary of Maryland's Department of the Environment. And I have a short presentation, and again, I just want to thank the committee, the assembly, for your continued leadership and keeping us honest and all that you do to make sure we're supporting the Bay. I don't know if you recall, but just a few months ago, I think it was a few months ago, Governor Moore, he actually pointed out that the $3.2 billion tourism economy that we have, and it does depend on, the clean waterways, and it also depends on all the things that we're doing. And as you know, most of that economic activity is around the Bay, the Chesapeake Bay. So the work that we do is just really critical. So I wanted to take a moment to say that. As you'll see on this slide that we have here, these are about the accomplishments, and what you'll see is that we have been laser focused on making real progress when it comes to protecting the Bay. On the next slides, I'm going to talk just briefly about the historic Conowingo Dam, the settlement that we had with Constellation. I'm going to talk about all of the investments that we've made to improve water quality. I'll speak briefly about the way we are strengthening our ability to be resilient when you think about stormwater events that are happening around us. And then last, I just want to talk really quickly about all the things that we're doing inside the building, inside of MDE, and how we're serving the public better now. We're more efficient, we're better. So I'm going to give just a few examples of all of those things. Oh, thank you. Do your job, Josh. Okay, just kidding. All right, on this slide, Conowingo Historic Agreement. This is one of the most important and I will say proudest accomplishments that I can speak about because it truly is a real indicator of progress and the progress that we have made in terms of protecting our water in the Bay. So we settled a long-standing decades, really, battle with Constellation regarding the Conowingo Dam. We brought in $340 million to improve water quality, restore habitat. We have money in there for dredging. There's money in there for trash and debris removal, fish passage, and a whole lot more. These are a lot of the things that we just could not come to an agreement with before. And this is one of the reasons why this settlement took so long. And I will say, just to brag a bit, this settlement really did happen because we brought all the parties who cared, all the ones who mattered. We brought them to the table, all of the stakeholders. We negotiated in good faith, and we built trust, and that's why we were able to finally get this done. And even with this settlement, Conowingo Dam, they're still providing Maryland with clean and affordable power. We're in good shape, and again, I think this is a very proud moment for Maryland. All right, reducing nitrogen in the Bay. On this chart, I just want to quickly show the progress that we're making in reducing nitrogen from the Bay. I think this graph is really clear. We've come a long way from 2010, and we're making good progress. It is true that the region, the Chesapeake Bay region, we did not meet our 2025 restoration goals, but like my colleague here said, we are doing well. Maryland, we're doing our part, and you can see that we are ahead of most other states. Not only did we meet the phosphorus and sediment goals, we also just about met the nitrogen reduction goal. We were at 97%. So again, this is all the great work that we're doing to do our part. And again, because of all this progress that we're talking about and that I'm talking about now, we're improving habitat conditions for oysters and crabs and fish, and we're ensuring that we have cleaner and safer water for Marylanders, for visitors. And again, this is something for us to be proud of. I want to talk about the investments that we're making in wastewater treatment. We've been making a lot of investments, as you all know, and that is contributing to the success of the Bay Health and restoration. In 2004, we've actually invested over $2.3 billion on our treatment plants, and we do have nation-leading treatment plants. And we've also used this funding for new septic systems and for cover crops for farms. Also, over the past 5 years, we also received nearly $300 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that was for quality water projects. But the reality is this is the last year for that funding. So we can't really depend on much of that going forward. I also want to point out when we're talking about funds and how we've been able to do so much, I want to bring up the Bay Restoration Fund. That has always allowed us to use those funds to upgrade the facilities in the manner in which we've done. We have a lot more to do. Yes, we've invested a lot of that money in upgrading the major wastewater treatment plants as well as the smaller ones, but we need to upgrade them again because they are aging. And because we know the Bay Restoration Fund will sunset in 2030, I just wanted to put that reminder out. We're going to lose 50% of that fund. And so I think it's time for us to start considering and just thinking about, what do we need to do to make sure that we're keeping up with those current levels and we're able to keep the progress where we are. So again, the Bay Restoration Fund, it's really important that we hopefully figure out a way to keep the levels where they are. Thank you, sir. Stormwater and resilience. I wanted to point out the importance of managing stormwater, particularly when we're thinking about, again, the health of the bay. So the bottom line is the stormwater standards from a long time ago, they are just not sufficient for the climate conditions that we're experiencing today. And so my agency, we're now modernizing those stormwater regulations so that they can actually reflect the current conditions of today. And we're not just updating these regulations in a vacuum. Instead, we're working with, we're engaging the public, we're working with stakeholders, we're asking them for feedback on everything that we're proposing, because we do want to make sure that what we're proposing does represent a balanced approach for dealing with things like housing, agritourism, and other land use priorities that our residents and the economy need. So we're in the process of doing that now, but I also want to just make a quick highlight that we also finalized the major new stormwater permit with the State Highway Administration in 2025. I think that was for me, I think it's important to mention that because as a result of that permit, 4,000 acres of impervious areas will be restored. That matters when we're thinking about the bay. And so all that we're talking about, all that we are all doing, this is how we are prioritizing, particularly that permit, green infrastructure and environmental justice. And this is also how we are honoring the Moore Miller's administration's commitment to protecting everyone, all Marylanders, and leaving no one behind. And the last slide, I just want to highlight and brag a little bit about the progress that we're making to transition the way we do our business at MDE and the way that we're becoming more efficient. We're serving Marylanders better than we were before. And again, this is how we are doing our part. When I started here 3 years ago, we had 250 permits that were administratively extended, which I learned when I first started that there was a cute little term called zombie permits. Well, I had to figure out what that meant. But those zombie permits, we've done so much. We've eliminated at least 80% of those permits, and now we're actually on target to eliminating all of them by the end of this year. And because operational efficiency is really important to me, it's a priority to me, we have also worked really hard to clear 94% of the permit backlog that we had. This only happened because of the dedicated employees at MDE, and they are working hard every day, all day, to do the right thing and to make sure that we're efficient in doing what we need to do. We've also increased inspections by 61%, and at the same time, we're providing more compliance assistance. We are enforcing more, and we're doing much more than we did before because we didn't have enough enough employees when we first started. But now I've upped the staff. We're just doing a lot more, particularly when it comes to enforcement. And what we're actually seeing is when we enforce more, non-compliance is actually dropping. And that's literally what it's all about. So in closing, I just want to reiterate that we will continue to work hard on behalf of Marylanders, and we will continue to collaborate and work closely with all of our stakeholders, our colleagues. And I appreciate you all again and all the work that we all are doing collectively. And now I'll turn it over to you, Secretary Addix.
Thank you very much. Secretary Kurtz is on the job. Appreciate that. Well, first of all, I'm Kevin Addix, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Agriculture, and I first wanted to talk about the accomplishments that we have been, as an industry and as an agency, moving toward. As many of you know, conservation is our top priority. We want to make sure that as part of this watershed, as members of the community, as the original environmentalists, the farmers want to make sure that they are keeping the soil on the land and building that soil and doing everything that we can to keep things productive, but also keep the bay clean. So to that end, and there are a lot of words on this slide, so I'll just point out some of the highlights. We have planned a record 128,000 acres, bringing our total to 847,000 acres under conservation plans. What that means is the farmers are actively engaged in conservation on their farms. Our staff is fully up to speed. A number of years ago, the General Assembly and the governor assigned a whole bunch of new conservation staff, ground level teams to actually help implementation on farms. In the last year, we've gotten everybody onboarded and out in the field. We, in this last year, had the largest traditional cover crop program in history. Nearly 3.5 million pounds of nitrogen were reduced through this program. And cover crops, for those of you who don't know, is our single best bang for the buck in terms of keeping the soil on the farm. If you have crops growing throughout the year in the form of your traditional crops that you do harvest, and then cover crops that are just simply there to do the job of anchoring the soil through the fall and into the winter and spring, you're keeping the soil on that farm. We have witnessed and supported $2.1 million in grants to transport 370,000 tons of poultry manure through the Delmarva Poultry Litter Initiative and Cooperative. The companies, the poultry companies, have contributed their own funds, $662,000 toward that. And what that is doing is capturing the poultry litter in areas where we have high phosphorus, high nitrogen, and moving it to other parts of the states where it can be accommodated. It's great fertilizer, and it's a natural fertilizer, and so our farmers love that as well. We've also approved a number of new BMPs, including agroforestry, which now we can count toward our water quality goals. Next slide, please. Thank you. New to the Bay program is an Ag Advisory Committee, which was launched through an executive committee order in this last year. And for the first time, what that means is our farming community, our agriculturalists, the folks who are in charge of that last mile of conservation to keep the nutrients on the land, reduce the nutrients, keep it out of the water. They are now officially a committee. We have 14 members across the watershed, 2 from Maryland and 2 from the other states that are focused entirely on helping to come up with new best practices, helping to inform the other committees, and make sure that agriculture is at the table. For the first time, the farmers themselves will say that they feel fully engaged and committed to the Bay restoration goals. Next slide, please. Our Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming program, or LEAF, you've heard a little bit about that. It launches this year. We are very excited about that. A few top-level points. First, the goal of the program is to incentivize practices to improve water quality, soil health, climate-smart wildlife habitat. We're expanding the idea of what conservation means from just the practices on the farm related to soil and related to nutrients, and broadening it to include the community, to include the ecology, some of the same trends that you're seeing with the Bay program with the new agreement. It is meant to be a customer-driven, consumer-driven model. So it will be incentivized-based. It will create a passport-type program where farmers that are doing more will get priority access to land preservation, to loans, to grants, et cetera. So we are creating essentially a market for conservation. It will amplify and align with existing programs, so it won't be its own standalone program. It will integrate and work perfectly well with the Bay Agreement, with the whole watershed program, et cetera. So the goal is to create a new program that all of our existing marketing, promotion, conservation goals can fall under. Last slide for us. The Roadmap to Resilience is a new report that was released on a very cold day a week and a half ago by the Harry Hughes Center for Agroecology within the University of Maryland. What is great about this is that it was producer-focused, The input came from producers, and then the great minds through Harry Hughes were able to work within the research community to come up with a number of recommendations, a couple of very, very specific goals that we should be reaching. Two, I wanted to point out, precision nutrient management, the idea that we can heighten our expertise with nutrient management and make sure that the farmers are given the tools to use fewer nutrients and incentivize new practices in that vein. Next up, next level cover crops. I mentioned cover crops before being the best bang for the buck. It's time for some innovation there. There are new seed mixes, there are new concepts out there that we think will take our farms much further along and get us to our conservation goals much more quickly. And I'm excited to say that MDA will take the lead on a lot of these initiatives. So with that, Chair Corman, Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Our first question is from Delegate Boyce.
Caught me off guard. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here, my three favorite secretaries.
In what order?
Now you're trying to get me in trouble, Madam Secretary. Same line. I wanted to, well, first of all, thank you all for being here, and I wanted to go back to, Madam Secretary, you talked about in your plants upgrade slide, you mentioned that 66 of the 67 plants had, I can't find the slide. Oh, here it is. There you go. Major plant upgrades. And then you said that, if I heard correctly and if I was wrong, blame my ears, is that you would, because we spent a lot of time doing these upgrades and it looks like we may have one more, that by this time they potentially all need to be upgraded again? Is that what I heard you say?
Not all of them, but a lot of them. Yeah, there's a cycle on the wastewater treatment plants, and some of them, it just depends on when they were updated. So some of them are now getting to the life cycle where we need to continue to update them.
And what's that life cycle, do you?
Is it 20 years? Yes. 20 years, yeah, 20 years.
Okay. And then, and given that, I guess.
So some of them were 20 years ago. Okay.
That they were
Will be up-
upgraded, but now they need, of that 66 that potentially need to be upgraded again.
Correct.
And when we talk about upgrades, we're talking about majorly, mainly like technologies potentially, or?
Yeah, enhanced nutrient removal, those kinds of technologies.
Okay. I appreciate that. And then I will go to Secretary Kurtz. How's the baby?
Fantastic.
Wonderful. Sleepless nights, I'm sure. We talked about Delegate Jacobs' favorite subject, the juvenile striped bass. So on the chart, you showed, here it is, it was a striped bass chart. For me, it's page 41. The assessment results.
Yes.
The right before, it's the one before that, I'm sorry, the bass index. And so between 84 and 89, we have this kind of low, and then now between 2019 and 2024, another low. And then you have everything up in between, and then taking that and looking at the next assessment's results. I guess I'm questioning what was happening with, looks like recruits, it looks like female, I guess, specimens between 66 and it looks like to 2016. Like, what is the correlation there between this big dip here?
Yep, so there's a lot of factors that play into that. And I think what we're looking at right now, and I think one of the biggest concerns for us at the moment is when you look at the impacts to the juveniles for this time period versus previous was more focused on water quality. This is more prey availability. And then also—
I'm sorry, you said what?
Prey availability.
Okay.
So we're seeing a misalignment of plankton, which is what the juvenile striped bass eat. That is a key hypothesis right now for the scientific community around striped bass. There is available prey, though, for the adults, right? Whether that be forage fish. Also important to note that the larger adults are migrating up and down the coast, so they have a lot greater access to different ecosystems. And so what we saw in the 80s with the overall adult population, very different than what we're seeing now, which is why we want to try to focus our attention now on protecting resident species until we can see some of these large years of reproduction. I think important to note, when you look at that juvenile age index, for us, looking back in 2011, 2015, we see some big age classes. And right now, that's what's sustaining us. For the several years prior to the moratorium in the 80s, we did not see those big bumper classes of reproduction. So one of the reasons I think why we still have that more healthy adult population, we're trying to do is prevent that from starting to dip. We want to keep that upward trajectory. It shows on that second chart where we're required to meet as our rebuilding goal by the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission in 2029. So again, we need to keep that line moving up. And the concern is without the next juvenile age years being so large, we will start to see that come down.
And so what other, I guess, states are moving to the proposed sections between closing off August and going, I guess, early May?
So that baseline adjustment is just for the state of Maryland.
Okay.
Okay. And each one of the states has different regulatory frameworks, dependent on what their industries look like, and also kind of the difference between us having the reproducing space and them being primarily the species that are migrating back and forth.
And if I'm correct, and I could be wrong because it's so much information, they essentially drop their eggs and then they kind of go about their business, and then they're left to, I forget how this works.
And then the eggs hatch, and
Right.
that's when we pick them up in the juvenile age index.
Right.
Yep. And so they are spawning in specific spawning reaches, and I think important to know, like those spawning reaches are still closed for people to do any kind of interaction with the fish, but the pre-spawn areas, as the delegate pointed out, would be open now.
Would be open. And then I guess the last would be, again, because we've been getting certainly a lot of calls about the concern of the switch. Again, for how long is this suggested for this kind of schedule change before you believe you'll see the kind of the numbers or the goals that you want?
Yeah, so there's two important pieces to that. So one, we set our catch limits every year, so it's annual. We are going to see in 2027, I think, further action on striped bass at Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission. We have to see what the commission does before we can then set our actual limits. They set kind of like the overall boundaries, and then we get to kind of figure out stuff that works in the middle of that. And so it's kind of hard to be able to predict, would we keep that, would we move it, and until we see what ASMFC does next year.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary McElwain, I was interested when you were talking about updating the stormwater regulations. I know that I was here when we passed the legislation and the regulations. And my question is, do you think that we might also need to update the legislation? Because, I mean, it was defined in some ways about, how much stormwater should have to be dealt with, whether you were in an urban area or redevelopment area or other places in the state. Have you looked at changing the law as well as the regulations?
No, we have not looked at that at this point. I think what we're doing is focusing on really understanding where we need to update, and that's why we have this open process where we're hearing from stakeholders, we're hearing from everyone. We know a lot of what we need to do just based on some of the things that I've seen by walking around to different communities. I've seen the flood issues with homes. I've heard about all of the HOA issues. And so I think we have a really good handle on being able to do what we need to do at this point to update those regulations. But if we find that we need to maybe approach you all about updating those, updating the law, we will certainly let you know.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other question was about the Chesapeake Bay Agreement with the other states. especially I was interested, because we were always looking at Pennsylvania because of the Chesapeake Bay, because of the Susquehanna River. And has there been progress in Pennsylvania on the agriculture runoff into the Susquehanna?
There has been progress. So one of the key victories of the Chesapeake Bay Commission in the past few years is getting the agricultural cost share program, a state-backed agricultural cost share program up and running in Pennsylvania. And they used a lot of the examples of what they saw in Maryland and Virginia to get that program up and fully utilized within the first year. And then to put more state funding behind it. So they're seeing a significant increase in the pace of practices going on the ground in Pennsylvania. It should be pointed out, they have 35% of the land mass in the watershed. And that's more than twice the amount of Maryland. So they just have quite a bit of land to cover, quite a few producers to get to volunteer to take on those practices. But they have, we've really seen a shift in Pennsylvania's leadership in the past few years.
Thank you very much.
Delegate Jacobs.
Mr. Chairman, try to keep it brief as I can. My favorite topic, just so you know, is Conowingo. Just so juvenile rockfish are close second, but and I'm going to leave you alone today, just for timing issues. But I did want to move on to Secretary Kurtz, kind of go down this road a little bit more on this juvenile index issue. I mean, isn't it true that 70 to 90% of the spawning striped bass and the entire East Coast is in the state of Maryland?
Yeah, the majority of striped bass that exist on the coast come from the Chesapeake Bay.
Right, 70 to 90%, I believe, is the numbers that I know. So what we do know is we have an enormous amount of large brood stock coming up the bay right now. It's been coming earlier every year. You could call it global warming, you could call it what you want, but every year seems to be more and more coming earlier and earlier. And they're the ones that are carrying the eggs for this 70 to 90% area for the whole East Coast. So it's a very important point there. But the one thing that I've learned, and I'd like for you to verify this, is that we know very little about what happens once the eggs are laid until the juvenile index survey is done. So we don't know if it's predication, we don't know if it's water quality, we don't know for sure what happens between the time those eggs are laid and that first survey.
Yeah, that's correct.
Is that correct?
So we don't know, yes. Is it predation? Is it water quality that's causing those eggs to disappear? Are they hatching? Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the good news is right now we're having a ice storm and snowstorm, and that's good for the plankton.
Yep.
So let's hope we get another snowstorm, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I know that may be one of the problems, but we're making radical decisions in this state, in the fishery, to shut down the entire rockfish fishery in the month of August. We're the state that's known as the striped bass capital of the world. There will be no one allowed to catch striped bass in the month of August under this proposal. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep.
And the other thing that I want to say, and I want to end as quick as I can, during that meeting with the Atlantic States Marine Fishery in October, the addendum 3 to Amendment 7 was two parts. One part was a proposed 12% reduction in the quota, commercial quota, and then the baseline realignment that we've talked briefly about today. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the result of the vote on the 12% proposed reduction was status quo due to economic reasons. Is that correct?
And that was our vote as well, the state of Maryland. Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to leave it at that with my questions with you today. I could go deep, but I'll just leave it at that. I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And next, I'm trying to go as fast as I can. So I talked about Blue Plains earlier today with these serious leaks that's going on in Potomac. And it's 50, 60 million gallons a day. I mean, could you give us any kind of update on that what's going on with that?
Yeah, so
They've
we're
closed down the whole river for
Yeah.
shellfish all the way down to 301 Bridge.
Right. So we're working very closely with DC Water and EPA. We're not the only regulatory agency that's really responsible for it, so we can only do the part that we can, which is, I believe we shut down the fishery part, right? Yeah. So we're working closely with them every day. We've been on the phone, and so it is important. It's an important issue we're following, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that things are done correctly.
So are there fines involved in this leak?
Not at this point.
I mean, will there be fines at this?
Not sure. Oh, we just have to see what happened. We don't know really what led to everything that's going on at this point. We're still trying to figure things out.
So do you know roughly how many millions of gallons have leaked so far?
Oh, do we know that?
Over 200 million gallons.
Over 200 million gallons.
Raw sewage? Or partially treated?
Raw.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we just finished lunch. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
So thank you for those answers. I think you're coming back for another briefing after this, right?
That's correct.
I got some more for you there. I'll wait for that. Secretary Addicks, just quickly, you talked about cover crop funding, and we know that it's been hugely successful, no question, in the bay quality. I know that we've heard many reports and thrilled to the success of cover crop. Last year, the funding was cut on the aerial spraying of soybeans, and that's a pretty sizable crop in the state of Maryland in any given year. And you talked about, your cover crop program this year. What's the plan this year going forward with cover crop funding?
Appreciate the question, Delegate Jacobs. I will say, just on last year, or I should say this year, the goal is always to make sure that we, with whatever dollars we have, can get the most acreage we possibly can. And so every year we do make an attempt to adjust the program based on whatever funding we have, whatever trends we're seeing in the field. So the aerial spraying for soybeans was a consideration this past year. We'll be meeting soon to figure out what the plan will be going forward. I will say, in terms of funding, in the budget right now, we're off by, I think, $2.3 million, and that's just due to the level of attainment of receipts that go into funding cover crop in the first place. So not a cut for cut's sake, but just, with the economy the way it is and real estate, et cetera, we're just not seeing the funds coming into that overall fund like it would be. I think, though, if you look back at the Harry Hughes report, there are ways for us to get smarter in using those dollars. So there will be ways that we're exploring through their research and through University of Maryland, et cetera, to figure out how to better use those dollars, target them better, certain crops, certain types of cover crops, et cetera. So we're excited about getting smarter about it and making sure that every dollar that we do get into that program is used even better.
Thank you very much. We'll be talking more about that as the session goes on, but I thank you for your answer. That's it for now, Mr. Chairman.
Great.
Thank you.
Delegate Jacobs, the DC water interceptor break was in my district, so you're worried about your fishermen, your watermen. I'm worried about my neighbors, so I'm with you. Deputy Secretary Ortiz was in touch with me over the weekend, so in addition to the secretary, we can connect with him for a deeper dive if you are interested in that discussion. And let me turn it over to Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary McElwain, just to follow up about the question that Delegate Boyce had concerning funding for the re-upgrading, I guess, of the major wastewater treatment plants, I just want to drill down a little bit further. Are you saying that if we don't have continuation of the full restoration fee when it expires or ratchets down in a few years, that we'll see a reversal in the improvements that we've had in nitrogen reduction from those plants, because those upgrades are necessary just to keep the status quo.
I would say that we need to continue to invest in the wastewater treatment. Will it end up being the exact same? I don't know, but I will tell you the success that we've had is because we've been able to fix pipes, change filters, upgrade the technology. When we stopped doing that, there is definitely a possibility that all the reductions that we're seeing and all of the great progress that we've made, we may not continue.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. So normally I would direct this question to Secretary Addix. We have a great dialogue about midges, but today I'm going to go down a different pathway with Secretary Kurtz about some midges. First of all, congratulations, by the way. Is there any truth to the rumor that you're trying to catch up with me? I think it's number 2 for you, right? Do you want to get to number 6? Is that?
I got a long way to go.
Okay, all right. So Secretary Addix and I have had many conversations about midges, and one of the things that I sort of learned over the interim this year was with respect to Back River and some of the other rivers in the area, is that there are some fishing operations that are very aggressive with certain species of fish that don't either have limits with respect to total catch or size, shad, certain catfish, things like that. There's one operator in particular that is like literally hauling a tractor trailer load every day out of the Back River of these kinds of fish. So we're not talking about, just the random person on a pier just catching a few fish. I believe that is having a part of an impact on the midge problem in eastern Baltimore County, where these predatory species that would normally go after these midges are being fished out in some of the waterways, because apparently there's a marketplace for some of these species of fish in New York City and places like that. I would love to get your thoughts about how we can tackle that problem. I realize that it's something maybe that requires legislative change. Maybe it can be done regulatory change. I don't know, but I feel like that's not a good thing to just be fishing out all these kinds of species from the rivers.
Yeah, I think, Delegate, that's a really interesting question and a really interesting point. I mean, I think when we think about midges, obviously, when I talk to the Secretary about it, we're providing kind of some of the scientific underpinning, but having a better understanding of the overall changes to the ecosystem and how that could impact negatively, right? Predation of midges, I think, is not something that I've considered, but I'm happy to follow up with you on. I'll talk to the team and get a sense there. And we tend to know a lot of the operators and get a sense for who they are, what species they're fishing in particular, and ensure that those aren't species that would be going after the midges. So I can follow up with you on that one.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for being here today. I'm new to this committee, so I'm wrapping my head around all this. I appreciate that you're entertain maybe the belabored questions. So one of the presentation of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, there's a chart that shows nitrogen's loads, and they increased in 2021, 2022. And the note says the loads increased due to significant noncompliance at several large wastewater treatment plants. That was Back River and Patapsco. If you look at the Department of the Environment wastewater tracking performance tool on your site, it seems that Patapsco continues to be out of compliance in 2024. Can you speak to why that is?
In that, there were weather conditions that contributed to the decline that we saw at Patapsco, but they are getting back on target. There are some challenges, but that was really part of the reason why those numbers changed in terms of reductions.
The 230-page report.
And power outages as well, sorry.
Okay. The big report that came after we had got some language in the budget a couple years back spoke to massive staffing problems at least the Back River wastewater treatment plant. That's the one in my district. Mm-hmm. Why do we continue to have such significant staffing challenges at that plant, and maybe even at Patapsco?
Well, we worked really closely with Back River. We had contracted with Maryland Environmental Services, They were deployed there for a while. I want to say a couple of years to help with the staffing issues that they had. There's a shortage of people who really honestly want to work in that field. And so they've had their challenges with recruitment. And they've been able to offset the workforce issues with MES. But right now, I do believe that they have a good handle on having the right people and having enough staff to get the work done.
So you think they currently have enough staff at the Back River wastewater treatment plant?
Well, hold on one second. Is that true?
Yeah, they're operating better than they ever have. And they've improved their staff. Are they at the levels they need to? There's probably still some vacancies.
So still vacancies, but
Still
they're doing
vacancies.
better, yes. And we're monitoring. We haven't walked away, even though we're not, we don't have the level of control we had before when we were there all the time and every day. We are still monitoring everything that they're doing, and we're working very closely with them.
So it sounds like there's at least some gap. Would you welcome maybe some biannual reporting on staffing levels at the wastewater treatment plants? Maybe we could narrow that down to the plants bigger than 50 million gallons a day. That would be the two big ones. Would you be open to that reporting?
I would want to learn just a little bit more of why we would need the reporting, and just to make sure that, I don't know, we may already have information that we can provide without that, but if you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of look into that a little bit more before I respond.
Sure.
We do have staffing reports already, so we have an idea of what they have.
Yeah, Delegate, let's just figure out if they're even the right people to do that. I'm not sure if they don't have direct control over some of those plants, so we just want to make sure they actually have access to that information or find out who the right people are, but it's a good idea.
Sure. One final question, if I may. There was some, when the Back River wastewater treatment plant opened, they applied to renew their permit for discharge. There's an opening for public comments, and groups like Blue Water Baltimore submitted questions and comments. Have you had an opportunity to comment on that and maybe speak to some of the reporting requests that groups like Blue Water Baltimore have had?
I'm going to have to refer this to my Director of Water, because I don't exactly have that answer. Do you have that answer?
Sure. Yeah, good afternoon. Lee Curry, I'm the Director of the Water and Science Administration.
Why don't you come on up, because
Please.
Sure.
Mr. Curry.
Yes, sir. Nice to see you again. Yeah, good afternoon, Lee. For the record, Lee Curry, Director of the Water and Science Administration with Maryland Department of the Environment. Your question?
So when a wastewater treatment plant goes to renew its permit,
Right.
it takes on public comment, and community groups have an opportunity to offer comment. Groups like Blue Water Baltimore, who, as you know, have been very vocal about, they were part of the lawsuit for the second consent decree, and they had a lot of feedback about the permit and what we should look at if the permit would be reapproved. I think there may have been other groups, maybe Chesapeake Bay Foundation themselves, I think may have all, okay, I'm getting the nod. So there's two groups. So have you had an opportunity to look at those public comments? Because I think that would be very formative for addressing some of the longstanding issues here. And can you speak to that?
I can. Yep. So there's two things that are happening. One, first, we got a consent decree in place for both plants. So, and that put them on a schedule for compliance.
Because you got sued.
Second was getting the permits upgraded and updated in place. They're currently administratively extended. Part of our effort was to engage the community. So we held public meetings located in and around the Back River wastewater plant, and then also the Patapsco plant. So we received a lot of comments. We're looking through those and reviewing all those comments right now. Those will be factored into our final determination, and the permit scheduled to be issued in final determination this year. So we will consider all those comments when we finalize and make changes to the draft permit that was provided.
But you don't have feedback today?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Fischer-Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. On page 23, I don't know if this is for you, Secretary Kurtz, or the panel, maybe Anna. As far as blue crabs are concerned, can someone either speak to or speculate as to why the graph in the blue for the adult female is just so up and down over the years? I know, it just kind of goes up and down very, very violently. So any science to bring to bear on that?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important point here, is that the goal is to, regardless of how big those jumps up and down are, is keep it within those two threshold pieces.
Right.
And so what we'll see is some years that could be related to temperature, to reproductive success. It could be related to additional harvest in the state of Virginia. It could be related to die-offs, related to dissolved oxygen. There's a lot of different reasons and a lot of things that are impacting crabs that kind of make it so it's a little bit more sporadic. With striped bass, they're much longer lived species, so you'll see them reproduce over and over again, whereas with crabs, they're much shorter lived species. So you do tend to see a lot more variability within that threshold range. And so that is kind of an unfortunate kind of component to their life cycle, but we do expect that. And that's why we set that as two thresholds rather than a target.
Okay, is that why you brought up striped bass? Is that why we're potentially seeing the very, very large striped bass, but maybe not as, if there's being challenged in juveniles, why we're seeing less juveniles and more of the really large ones?
Well, that's just related to the fact that the older ones from previous year classes are still the majority of the population.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Last question to this panel, Delegate Baylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you guys for being here. Just a quick question. I think one of my favorite parts in the governor's Bay bill last year was this idea of implementing the credited practice of oyster restoration for nutrient credits. I was just wondering, I know I heard from Anne Arundel that they might be interested in pursuing that, and Queen Anne's County as well. I think there might be other counties that might be interested in utilizing that. So I was just wondering, is that working? Is it implemented, or is there a timeline in the future? And I don't know if that's DNR or MDE, so I would just be curious.
Yeah, so the aquaculture piece has been figured out and is working, and we're seeing that in places like Charles County. But I think we're still working through with the Bay program to the restoration credit itself.
Got it. Is there like a timeline that you can think of?
We're required by that bill to have that figured out within 2 years of the enacted date. So I believe that is next year in October.
Great, thank you.
Okay, maybe the last question for this panel, Delegate Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the Executive Director of the Bay Commission, the Bay model, when was the last time that was updated? And can you give me a little bit of insight on how that process of updating the science of the model?
I can give you a very poor update on that because that is not my particular expertise, but the Bay model is currently under an update right now. So we're preparing for the next version of the Bay model to be out. One of the components of the revised Chesapeake Bay Agreement is to allow for that new model to be out, to provide us new pollution reduction targets, and then give the jurisdictions time to write plans or to amend their plans to meet those targets. So the next iteration of the model is currently in progress right now. When we say Bay model, we really should, I think it's got multiple models that are wrapped up into it. So many different components of understanding how the ecosystem works, responds to water quality, how the water quality responds to pollution reductions, and how our actions on the land create those pollution reductions. So pulling all of that together on top of land surveys to understand what the watershed looks like now versus 5 years before, 5 years before that, all of those get pulled into the model, which is why when we do an update, it is kind of a very big deal and takes quite a bit of time and quite a bit of peer review to make sure that it is sound and ready for use by managers. So that's probably as much as I can say without getting myself into trouble right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you to this panel. We're going to call up our last panel. One is in person, one is virtual. So we'll start with Brian Hardman, the Maryland Charter Boat Association, who I think has been patiently waiting. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and the members on it. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm the president of the Maryland Charter Boat Association. I was asked the other day to give an update on what has happened to us basically over the last 2 years. At the January 24th Atlantic States Marine Fisheries meeting, there was a gentleman from, each state has 3 members on this committee, and they meet, I think, 4 times a year on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries, and they try to regulate the fishes, have some continuity between the states. There was a gentleman from Connecticut that said he thought it was unfair that the Maryland charter boats had 2 fish, which we've had 2 fish for years because we're in an electronic reporting system on it. They had a vote, and they took our second fish away. And at that time, New Jersey had 2 fish, which they still do today. And we were stuck, reduced down to 1 fish. I did call the department and explain how this was going to decimate our industry and ask for help. And I was replied, just now's not the time. About a month later, the department voluntarily closed an additional 2 weeks, May 1st to the 15th. And introduced a slot limit that put it down to 19 to 24 inches. Previously, when we had 2 fish, it was 19 to 31. As soon as the 24 season rules got announced, the calls to cancel trips started coming in, and they haven't stopped yet. During the course of the 24 season, the decline continued all the way into 2025, and repeat customers no longer call to rebook. Most of these guys have wound up going to fish in New Jersey. When the charter boats entered the electronic reporting system, it's only really right now the charter boats and the commercial are in the electronic reporting system right now. The recreationals do not have electronic reporting system under it. So some data from the fax system is there's 409 charter boats, only 246 reported at least 1 trip last year. Our catch and release harvest went from 92,000 fish down to 26,000 fish. Passenger count went from 78,000 to 35,000. This is the entire group. This is from where we started in 24 to current. 56 charter boats have been sold or listed for sale. 5 local tackle stores went out of business. Waterfront fishing communities from Rock Hall, Kent Island, Tillman Island, Chesapeake Beach down to Solomons have all been decimated. Some captains have taken up part-time work or even full-time work if they had a boat payment to keep up because the business has been decimated so much. April's been closed for fishing for over 5 years to protect the female spawning stock, and we fully agreed with that years ago. We used to start on April 15th to give up those 2 weeks to protect the female spawning stock. April historically has been when 80% of the female fish spawn. Over the last few years, the young of the year has been extremely low due to weather. Most of it, I think, is environmental with the warmer months starting earlier. This year is going to help. This is how it used to be when the fish was robust, is we'd have these snowpacks and the cold water runoff, and it would delay the spawn until the zooplankton was available for them to feed on under it. They did see, I believe, the young of the year. They have an accounting, and these numbers might not be exact, but I think the young of the year count went from 1.1 to 4.2 last year. So while it's a 400% increase, it's a move in the right direction, but lower than what the target is. But it's still positive progress, what we have. Last year, DNR decided that it wanted to change the fishing season, but just a year earlier. Now, the change of fishing season was to open up May 1st to the 15th and also open up April. The year before, the reason they closed May 1st to 15th, it was the crisis to protect these female spawning stock. 12 months later, all of a sudden, the crisis has resolved itself, and now these fish no longer need protection under that. I attended a meeting at DNR. At that point, when I was brought in, the entire baseline was already designed. I walked into a meeting, and they just laid it all out, so there really wasn't any input from the charter boat communities. I hear things like they got community input and things like that, but it was not coming from us. There were some talking points put in where the season would be easier to understand. It would help some tackle stores, public access, but there was none of these concerns the year before when we were being decimated or when these towns were being decimated or when these other tackle stores were going out of business. So the baseline, in my opinion, appears to just represent a small group of anglers that believe that they have the right to catch, hold up a female fish, and take a picture of it. And we are adamantly opposed to that. We still think these fish need to be protected now, and while we're in this rebuilding program, they're supposed to go up past 28 under that. Average female, you hear different stories. Average female fish can hold anywhere. I've been told by marine biologists there's numbers from 5 to 7 million eggs, up to 10 million eggs under that. And I was looking at these numbers, and even if only 2 fish a week discharged on the low side, 5 million eggs, that's 40 million during the month of April. And if only 5% of those fish were to harvest, that's 2 million eggs. Well, if only 5% of those were even to still survive, that's 100,000 fish. And that's the fish I think we ought to survive. No one wants to talk about this. No matter how many meetings I've been to, they never want to talk about the discharge of eggs. These female fish will swim away when you put them away. There's something, I got a fish handling report that I'm going to make sure that everybody has availability on. This fish handling report was not reviewed or discussed when they were coming up with this baseline. It's almost impossible to do that because once you read page 1 and read page 2, it talks about once a fish is out of the water more than 2 minutes, says 120 seconds on here, there's a 50% chance loss of equilibrium after the handling. And then it talks about the repercussions of what that does to a fish. It says the fish returns to the spawning grounds exhausted, prolonged asphyxiation constrains their ability to resume migration, locate mates, complete egg deposition, and fertilization. And that's only after 2 minutes. And I think Delegate Jacobs said, you'll see pictures right now, people are holding up fish, and those fish, it has to be 5, 8, 10 minutes out of the water. There's something called lactic acid that builds up in these fish, and lactic acid, if it gets into the bloodstream, will sterilize these eggs, also causes the eggs to discharge. It could kill the fish, it's rare, but it kills the fish, but most of these fish, it would take up to 72 hours for these fish to die. That's why nobody ever sees them. It's a long time coming onto that. But I'll make sure you get this report because if somebody would have read this report, I don't see how anybody can read. Now, this is done by Massachusetts in 2025. How anybody can read this and go, yeah, I think it's a good idea to open up catch and release in April. I just don't see how you could even rationally get there. So to open it up for whatever reason, this more access or something makes no sense to me. If you want to protect, it seems like now the shiny new object is, look over here, let's close August because of catch and release. Maryland charter boats, we do not catch and release. We never have. We catch, if we're allowed 6 fish, we'll catch our 6 fish and we leave. We don't want to sit there and try to come back on a fish that's caught 6 times the day before. And we've always been that way. So if the problem is catch and release, then maybe you ought to address catch and release. So, I'll finalize this, but last March 2025, 2 charter boat captains took out a Maryland DNR marine biologist for the spawning stack biomass survey. And this marine biologist told these 2 captains, because they had heard about this baseline proposal, what's coming up, and this person said that they are 100% opposed to it and said in April, these female fish are within days and sometimes hours of spawning. So imagine how many times a fish is going to be caught in April when it's warm, caught and released repeatedly when hundreds of boats are out there catching nonstop. You know that these eggs are going to be discharged. And once again, that is never addressed. So we're under the belief that you ought to just leave the fish alone. I also spoke with a pound netter down in Tillman Island, and they're not allowed to, obviously, to catch these female fish. When they see them, they have to lower the net to roll the fish out. And this captain has said, I can sit there and watch these female fish discharge eggs due to the stress, and we're not even touching the fish. Nothing good is going to come out of this thing. I don't just understand why you just can't continue to leave April closed and protect the female fish. Charter boats are a commercial business with a commercial license and large overhead, yet we have weeks taken away. When I started 35 years ago, we had 8 months for a fishing season. Now we're down to 188 days. This baseline plan is trying to get the people that catch and release. I have no issues with recreational boaters at all. I have no issues with them. What I do have an issue with is all the rules and regulations favor recreational and are negative towards the charter boats, the for-hire industry. We're a business that's just trying to make a living off of it, and it's getting tougher and tougher to do that. But when the regulations say, hey, let's move the recreational guys that catch and release, because they catch and release on our harvest days, but they catch and release in the end of December, and they catch and release in January, February, March, is now their days, which is 304, they want to move them up to 334. When's enough enough? Our days are going down. We're going the other direction. Their days are going up. And I had a person from DNR say, well, can't you book a half a dozen catch and release trips in April? No. We have diesel charter boats that are winterized. We have to pay more insurance to keep them in the water, but they're winterized. And we've told our clients for years, after we've heard how much decimation is going down, the stock's going down, that we need to protect these fish, and they don't want to be part of the problem. I mean, we look foolish making a 180-degree circle coming back going, you know what, forget that. We're going to get there and catch and release these fish now. It just doesn't matter. We don't, you know, with the 6 fish, we're not going to sit there and do that just to try to book another 6 trips. Plus, that's not going to turn our industry around in doing this. I've offered the department in many, many meetings, the department heads on there, that I would take them out on one of my boats or any charter boat they want if they want to go out and see what we see. See, there is an abundance of fish out there, but the fish have moved. I've sat there and made a call a couple years ago, 2 years ago, when I was down in Eastern Bay, which is at the southern end of Kent Island, and it was in November, and we were surrounded by acres and acres of fish that are 16 to 19 inches, which are 1, 2, and 3-year-old class fish. The juvenile fish, they say, that aren't here, but it's an abundance of them. They were coming out of the rivers, and I don't know how many of you are aware about the dolphin that's been coming up here for the last 5 years, but the middle of the bay clears out. And these fish are going up in these tributaries and going up there, and they're staying up there, and they can find food around these rock piles and these piers and these marshes, and they just stay up there all summer long, and they don't come out until the water gets cold. And then once the water gets cold, the bait moves out and they come out. So I hear recreational anglers all the time going, I fished by Thomas Point for 20 years and there's no fish there. Yeah, I know. It doesn't mean the fish aren't around. It just means they're not there. You know, and so the fish will stay around the Bay Bridge a lot because they know there's a predator after them and they need something to hide, somewhere to hide. So I just think we need to get people out on the water. And I've said this before in DNR meetings, you can't manage the fisheries by an office in Annapolis. Come out with me or go out with a commercial fisherman, go out and talk to a pound netter, go out on the water and actually see what's really going on, and then come back and make your assessment. Charter boats have been a part of Maryland history, but we're slowly being pushed out of business. We're the smallest user group and have the least amount of days. Even the commercial guys do not fish. They stop fishing in March and April. And they're looking to open it back up for catch and release. So most of our clients are middle to low income, mainly blue collar fishermen. And this takes, when you put regulations to stop us, these guys can't afford boats on their own. This is their only opportunity to go fishing most of the time, is to go fishing with a charter boat. I've said it before, we used to be our own sector. There was, and I think Governor Moore signed into law the Chesapeake Bay Legacy Act, which identified 3 sectors: recreational, for hire charter boats, and commercial. That being said, we used to have our own sector, and we should have it right now. I mentioned to somebody at DNR, and they said, well, we'll look at that after the 2027 stock assessment. Another 50 boats are going to be out of business by that time. When we had 2 fish, we caught 92,000 fish. If you gave us 2 fish today with the amount of boats, only 246 reporting 1 trip after that, it would be years before we'd ever get back to that. So you could give us 2 fish and give us our own sector and let us give us our own season, just like the commercial guys do, and regulate it. And we're not going to go after these. We're not going to hit the numbers we had before. So we're not part of the problem. The problem has always been, as everybody can hear from that, it's always catch and release. But because we're regulated under the recreational sector right now, when you want to regulate catch and release and make these recreational rules, it bleeds over to us, which is a commercial entity. And I'm just asking if there's any way possible that we could be separated out. We're kind of on a fight for survival right now. And you got captains now that have taken up part-time jobs, and they can only full-time job. They can only fish on the weekends. And it used to be a business that was handed down multi-generational. There is no business to hand down multi-generational at this point. And it's a shame because Maryland was known for its charter boat industry. So that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you very much. We can now bring up David Sikorsky, Executive Director of the Coastal Conservation Association.
Hello, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. David Sikorsky, I'm trying to get my video going, sorry. Executive Director of Coastal Conservation Association of Maryland, but I'm also the legislative proxy for the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, acting as the ongoing proxy for Delegate Stein. I served on the Sport Fish Advisory Commission from 2009 until 2024, been on multiple advisory panels at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and was invited to talk here today, but wasn't quite sure exactly what was on the agenda until recently. And so I do sit on the striped bass board, and I think that's the most relevance to some of the discussion going on today. I participated in a task force which helped create the baseline approach that DNR held, and commend them for bringing that task force together to specifically talk to some of the opportunities which exist to change the seasons currently, and that DNR has proposed. And so regarding that measure, when DNR put out their 2-week scoping period for the baseline reset, I joined 54 other folks that signed on to a letter of support through DNR's fishery public comment email during their initial period, and staying willing to have further conversations around this specific baseline. In the end, the folks that signed on to the letter with us also represent for hire sectors, and the letter does speak to the complexity in striped bass management, like Mr. Hardman just shared. There's a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different groups. I hear from them as a commissioner on the commission for many species, not just striped bass, and understand how complex this perspective or this situation is, where we have poor recruitment, therefore we have less fish, a finite resource which we share. We also have a long history of managing this fishery. I've been involved in some way since around 2009 when I joined Sport Fish Advisory Commission, and one of the first topics I recall us talking about was preseason catch and release and whether or not it was a viable way to allow fishery access, but also mitigate fishing mortality. Fishing mortality is really what we measure and what we try and curb in fisheries management. It is how many fish are dying. It's fish that die from direct harvest in either commercial or recreational fisheries. And it's also fish that die from accidental catch, what we would call bycatch, or catch and release mortality or bycatch mortality. So all fishing includes a certain component of accidental mortality and non-targeted mortality that can fall into that bycatch category. And it's difficult to kind of take it out of the box and only put it into one little group of people or describe this very complex fishery in a short period. So like Dr. Colton said earlier today, I think it would make sense to have a side conversation and talk about all the different things that are impacting striped bass. I sit through these meetings time and time again, hours upon hours over years. And so it's a big picture in my mind that can't really be parsed through in direct points necessarily today. But a couple that come to mind is, as the Secretary mentioned, there are some best practices with catch and release that can be implemented. And I have spoken in support of these types of things forever. Really just common sense. You don't want to try and negatively impact an animal that you want to release, and it's your intention to let go so it can go and do its thing, whatever that might be. We have to take a step back and ask ourselves at times when measuring this trade-off of whether or not we allow catching of a fish, whether we allow catching and harvest of a fish, or just release. And then also what's happening with that fish throughout its life cycle. And with striped bass, they're being targeted by someone 365 days a year. They're out there. There's a lot of folks going after them. And so purposely, we've tried to structure the recreational fishery in Maryland where we have a small slot limit that's allows access, allows balance, so you can catch the small fish, but really leave the big fish alone. That's partly the closure of trophy season, which the Secretary spoke of. And it's important to think about, okay, how many of these big fish are out there in the water? How many eggs could they produce? As Mr. Hardman mentioned, they can produce a lot of eggs, which can lead to a lot of baby striped bass. And that's exactly why DNR attempts to count how many babies make it into that year one stage. And that's actually the graph that was shared in the Secretary's slides. On the right side shows you approximately 100 million year one striped bass are entering into the system. So as we talk about these numbers, it's really important to make sure they're relative to each other and we can have it in a more structured environment if it relates to how we're going to regulate this fishery. That's what we do at the commission. That's what we do through advisory commissions at DNR that I participated in for quite some time. And regarding this baseline, a task force was created. There were multiple meetings where we talked through the details of whether or not it made sense to do a trade-off and add more days for recreational fishing. It's my understanding that in DNR's original scoping period, they received 70% support for the new baseline. And again, our letter that reflects both for hire captains and marine businesses also support the baseline. So again, a lot of complexity around this stuff and who's doing what. I would just mention that one of the last things I'll mention, and I'll stop. I'd gladly answer questions rather than continue to talk about this. NRP does have the authority to make sure that people are handling these fish right, especially during a time period when they cannot keep them. And as I mentioned, the recreational fishery does not keep large fish. They can release them and should be releasing them quickly. There's some states where if this fish is over a certain size, it cannot be lifted out of the water. And I guarantee you those that are deriving benefit from pursuing large fish, which include for hire captains, would absolutely consider something like that because it's their business partner too, and they care about the future of these fish. I spoke to one captain yesterday who's also a signer on the letter and the leader of an organization. And I said, hey, what are you doing with your boat with all this weather? He said, man, we're going to put it on land. And man, am I really happy. I've had the last 3 or 4 weeks in January to put some money away. And boy, do I hope I get April, because for the last 5 years, not having access in April has really impacted some tackle stores and people in the for-hire industry. Mr. Harbin spoke to certain types of boats and certain reasons why they may not pursue April fisheries. But there are other captains out there. There are other stakeholders being impacted by when we allow access to fishing in Maryland for our most important fishery. The most important thing of the baseline that's reset, I may have said it a moment ago, but I'll restate it, is this baseline allows us, without a net measurement or a net impact on the resource, but long-term, allows us to have 92% of the days available on the calendar year for folks to potentially do business. So that's 92% of the days to go fishing. People like to talk about it in catch and release versus harvest, et cetera, but frankly, it's my job to actually rise above that and think about what can I allow for people to go fishing. Going fishing is a chance for hope. It's a chance for bringing a till at a tackle shop or at a gas station or at a hotel. It doesn't take an economist to realize that if you get 92% of your days versus 83% of your days to potentially go fishing, you do have a chance to make more benefit to our state by providing that access. That hedged against the reality that we've had poor recruitment, and additional reductions may be coming with new assessments that are due in 2027 to affect the 28 season. We want to kind of hedge ourselves. More days will mean if there's a future reduction for all stakeholders in the Bay, we should be reducing. We're going to have to reduce that potentially. And so if we're starting from a higher perspective or a higher number of days, I think it's a more strategic place. So I'll stop there and gladly, of course, follow up with everyone. I'll send the committee the letter I've spoke to multiple times, and would look forward to additional meetings with multiple stakeholders who are in the room, because I think that's really important. Quite often our conversations happen way too siloed on this topic in particular.
Great, thank you very much. We have a question from Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you. So, Mr. Sikorsky, while you're still on the screen, a couple questions for you. One is, isn't it true that under this baseline realignment, there'll be 34 new additional days to the catch and release season and 5 less days to the hook and line season?
I believe that is correct.
Okay. My second question, I don't know if you've seen them, but there are pictures on Facebook often where there would be 2 or 3 guys standing up in the same boat holding up big fish, 3 big fish, all at the same time. Wouldn't it be safe to say they were not caught and landed at the same time within that 2-minute window? They were probably, that size fish, probably caught, back to back and not necessarily all at one time, where you could get them out of the water and up in the air and back in the water in 2 minutes, 3 of those fish at one time?
It's hard to say. The fish obviously travel in schools and people hook up multiple times. I've actually seen pictures of captains holding fish in nets alongside of the boat to make sure that they can unhook it, get their client ready, quickly get a picture, and then release the fish. It happens in every fishery that we're handling these fish, pound nets. I heard somebody talking earlier about, dealing with these fish in a pound net. I've participated in gill net fisheries before and seen that happen. So the reality is fishing kills fish, and what we need to try and do is measure that and balance it against access. I don't want anybody impacting fish, especially what we call pre-spawn, but frankly, the regulations we have don't even allow access in places where fish are spawning. So yes, the bottom line is it is the best practice to not sit there and leave fish on the deck. Any fishery can do that. You see it happen in gill net fisheries. You see it happen in pound net fisheries, where fish are penned in some way or retained by some way by the fishermen. And the faster we get them back in the water, especially during cold, high oxygen periods, is when we can make sure that those fish are going to survive. And that's part of the factor of why April is a period for catch and release, but not July and August. That water temperature piece.
All right.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah. Well, my last question is, don't you think it makes more sense if you're going to kill a fish that you kill one and not one that may have potentially 5 million fingerlings that could be hatched a month later?
So, to a certain extent, but there's also...
So what's being proposed is there will be a mortality with catch and release. There's no question. How big the mortality is up in the air. But those fish are the ones that are carrying the eggs. the fish that are going to be caught in August are not carrying any eggs. That's one fish. Isn't that correct?
So the fish which are being interacted with in the spring are of spawning age and return year after year to spawn. If a fish is impacted in a way so that it cannot spawn and it lives, then the following year it returns. If a fish is killed in a fishery, obviously it cannot return. And so there's this ongoing cycle. The summertime fish that we may kill is that choice. It's a fish that we're deriving to benefit someone in some way versus a fish we're letting go. It's too complicated because it's this annual cycle and this judgment call that we make. But in the end, Maryland has had both a small fish fishery because it's what we've had most available to us across recreational and commercial for a very long time. We've need to measure down how many we kill, therefore lower our fishing mortality. And catch and release is not really a way to make a measurable benefit when it comes to dead fish from fishing mortality because it's so, as you know, we've worked on legislation together on recreational fisheries data. Recreational fisheries data and what's actually happening in numbers of fish being impacted in catch and release mortality is such a small number on an order of magnitude compared to a commercial quota or recreational catch or coastal recreational removals, which is where the vast majority of recreational fishing exists. And so the journey of this fish and whether or not we hurt it or not is very complicated. I would argue that in the Chesapeake Bay, we make a mistake by having anchored gill nets in Virginia right now that are intercepting the fish on their way in, killing fish with no maximum size limit. We have a commercial fishery in Maryland that's 18 to 36 inches, which right now can be catching fish which are spawning stock fish and killing them. And so comparing that as a moral judgment against somebody that wants to catch and release a fish, I think, you've got a lot of ground to fill there when it comes to a dead fish versus another dead fish. And so we can look at these ongoing practices, and that's the way I try and look at it and try and say, okay, we want to keep as many ships afloat as possible within our culture and our industry across our state. But when we start talking about it on a really small level and trying to shut down access to fishing, which is what led us to this point, April was shut down in 2020 simply to maintain a 2-fish bag limit for a small group of people. And that's kind of what brought us to the here and now. Prior to that, different people have been let out at different reductions over time. And so again, this is a very complex issue. It's not as simple as saying that, we're not even having a clear conversation around the economic trade-off between accessing the fish, the eggs, and what we know and don't know. Frankly, we can do that. And I think DNR has been doing a good job of leading that type of conversation. The baseline task force to get to this specific issue was a great example of that. And I'd look to Josh and his team, or pardon me, Mr. Secretary and his team, to try and advance what the path forward is and what are the number one priorities for us to try and identify moving forward. Not this debate over catch and release as if it's this moral judgment, moral argument, because all fishing kills fish. I want to see increased economic opportunity at any chance we can, but it's really difficult when you have Mother Nature providing us with what's going on and what's happening in our watershed from an environmental perspective, a population perspective, impervious surface. And then on the other side, blue catfish, there's a lot more at play than just simply stakeholders, and who gets to, go fishing. So long answer, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that short answer. I'll talk to you later about that.
All right, thank you all. That concludes the. He's not at the table, Delegate Jacobs. So we've got another briefing after this, so we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about these issues. Appreciate you bringing them to our attention, and we, of course, talked about in the other panels. That concludes our State of the Bay briefing. Just a reminder, we need to reload the system to transition to our next briefing, and the Vice Chair and I will be at the Rules Committee, so Delegate Stein will be presiding. Be as lengthy with him as you want to be, Delegate Jacobs. Thank you all very much.